Don't let the stuffed animals fool you. This is a quilting video, and we are going to have so much fun today. We're going to do this free-spirited creation of 5 quilts. We're going to start with these 2.5-inch squares. These are my boxes, and I'm just going to use up really hard to use 2.5-inch squares. What I'm doing is I'm making darling little quilts, and I want them to be at least 24 inches. That's why I showed you my 24-inch ruler right there to the side, and I am laying them out just in diagonals, and these really wild colors. So I'm putting the 2 wild colors together, and then I'm separating them with a stripe so it can help your eye rest. So all I'm doing is taking 2.5-inch squares that already are cut in my 2.5-inch box. So if you have a 2.5-inch box, and I'm going to make a really fun to look at for children quilt. And that's it. I'm laying them out. The end. And changing how the colors look, you can see I throw in some blues to change it up so your eye can rest, and this red just really sets off the diagonal, and then I choose these other fabrics, just whatever I have. I'm trying to give you permission to get out your 2.5-inch blocks and make a quilt like this. Just start laying them out, making them pleasing enough to you, and then we're going to put a border on it, and the border will kind of calm it down and help us feel free-spirited and happy. We'll do that in a minute. The point of this video, if you haven't figured it out yet, is how to use different scraps, and we're going to use some UFOs too. And I'm doing all 5 quilts all at once in one day. There's a special project I'm going to tell you about a little later that these quilts are for, but they have lots of purposes, so we'll talk about that in a while. I take my rows, I stack them up, I put them in a container, and I leave this because this quilt is ready to start sewing by my sewing machine. Time to start working on our second quilt. This is some of the fabric I got from the estate sale that we made the video about, and I'm measuring it right now. I'm trying to see how I can divide it into thirds. How big can my strips be? Because we're just going to make a quick little sweet strippy quilt. This is simple, sweet, and really shows off fabric. So I cut the least amount I could, you can see, and the rest is just scraps for later. Then I cut with my great math 3 sizes, and I'm not telling you sizes not to keep it a secret, but because your process is going to be different sizes. You just want it to be 24 to 30 inches when you're done. So you kind of do math as you go. So I cut 2 smaller pieces, and then I'm going to ponder if I want to add a purple, where I want to do the purple, what kind of strips I would like to add. I found this gorgeous piece that looks so great with it. See, they're little piggies dancing, did you see? And I decide, okay, I'm going to use up all the pink for 2 big strips. So I'll have 2 big strips, 3, and then the 2 smaller ones on the end, and that is going to be the quilt, and I'm going to bind with that beautiful purple. I lay these out, cut them around, I don't know, 28, 29 inches, big enough that I can trim them down in a minute. And then I cut these the same. They don't have to be exact because I'm going to trim the ends off when I'm done. So this quilt is so free-spirited and easy. You can use 1/4-inch seams or not. It's not going to matter because nothing's going to match up. You're just going to sew them together. You want to sew straight. That's what matters the most with this one. Keep your seam straight and it will look fabulous. There's quilt number 2. Now I get out some UFOs. These UFOs were made from pieces and parts of a mystery quilt that I didn't actually like the mystery quilt. I just took all the parts and pieces and made up this block. And I made a whole bunch of these blocks and I just have them waiting. I like how they look. I thought about putting sashing between. I decided they're big enough. I like them touching. At this point, I'm not sure if I'm going to put sashing around it or just bind it in pink. But it'll be the right size either way I go. Number 3, ready to sew. This sweet block of applique butterflies has a great story. My Aunt Renee, who is 95 years old in April, gave me a set of blocks that she had appliqued when she was much younger. And she said to do whatever I want with them. So here's what I'm doing with this one. I'm cutting out this beautiful flower and I'm going to put it in the middle of the butterflies. I'm just going to do raw edge applique, which is just cheating compared to her gorgeous applique, but it will be really fun for this quilt. It'll look so cute frayed in the middle. I cut out the blue flower, which is bright and fun, and do you recognize that this This fabric is from that estate sale also. It's so fun and so bright and so happy for those butterflies. It has just enough orange in it to make it work. I cut out the pieces and get them just the right width to look good and to be the right size. I'm squaring up this block so it can be perfectly square. I want the butterflies a little bit closer to the flowers. There's no rules about this. I'm simply doing what I want to make it look the way I want. So as you take your blocks, just play with them, cut them up, do different things, do weird things. Who would put Yardage applique on a gorgeous applique block? We would. And not only did we cut out the flower, after it was sitting there, we thought it looks lonely, it needs a leaf or two. And so we just took and cut out a little leaf. We're going to do one more, and it just pops right there in the middle of that quilt. And wait till you see this one quilted at the end. I spend the most time and I do beautiful quilting on it. A little bit of glue to hold it in place, and then I'm going to cut out borders. I'm going to sew those first two borders on, and that will be it. Then I'll need to cut the big borders for the sides, and it will be, ta-da, done. So fast, so quick to make it a medallion in the middle of that. Number 4, ready to sew. I've been seeing a lot of brick quilts out there. So lately when I'm done with a novelty fabric and I just have a scrap or two left, I've been cutting out 5x8 bricks. That's what this shape of fabric is called. It's a brick. I've just been cutting them out so that I could do this and make a novelty quilt with the leftovers. So the trick seems to be to use the same colors, blue and red, and then divide them up so that you can see the diagonal. It makes it so it's calm to your eye and you can just enjoy the different novelties stacked together. They don't even match each other. There's monsters and ducks. It's just darling. There are so many different things you can do with bricks. I think I'm going to continue to cut them up and keep them because I want to play with them in different ways in the future. Now that this quilt is done, we have our 5th quilt, and all 5 of these are ready to sew. I'm going to sew them all at once and streamline them through, starting with the simplest one, which is sewing on borders. I sew on borders, and as I get that first border on, I just pick up the next quilt and start sewing. Instead of using a thread saver, I'm just going project to project to project, sewing on and off different projects. I'm pressing this down, and then I press the seams one way, the other way, like we always do, so they can budge together and fit perfectly in the middle. And these 2 quilts are going to be done so fast. And it looks like I spent tons of time on them because the blocks in them have had tons of time spent on them. So there is sometimes an advantage to having some really great UFOs laying around your house. Thank you, Aunt Renee. We should all have an Aunt Renee. This one is simple. Press it. It's ready. It's beautiful. It just is going to be gorgeous. Our next one is the strippy. And so while we sew the strippy, I'm going to start at the same time sewing our bricks because we're going to web the bricks. And so I'll do 3 seams of the bricks in the webbing method. We made a video on it. We'll list it below. I'm going back and forth from webbing those bricks. I transfer over, I sew another seam on the strippy, and if I just go back and forth between these 2 projects, pretty soon both of these projects are going to be done. Lickety split. Did you see me flip that pig fabric over? The pig fabric is not directional, but sometimes in fabric the repetition is so close that it was all looking the same. So sometimes if you just flip over a fabric that isn't directional, you'll like where it lands and where the characters are, and it'll just be more appealing to your eye. I did that with the middle one, and then the next 3rd one I'm going to leave it the way it is, and it's going to just look really, really more varied and happier. It's all done being sewn, so I'm trimming the 2 edges so that it's the width I want it to be, so it'll match the length it is, so it's nice and square and happy. And ta-da! It's ready to be quilted. This last one, I just start sewing it, and I also am going to web it. There is a lot of directional fabric, which is why I've pinned it. This one, the monsters are directional. Lots of them aren't, but it's so important if you're having directional fabric to put it directionally. This quilt isn't as tall as I wanted it to, and I knew that when I designed it. So I went and chose this wonderful green, and I'm going to simply put a top and bottom border to bring it up to size, and it will be gorgeous when it is bound in that same green. On the 5th quilt, I left space for it to have a border, and I wasn't sure what I wanted the border to be, but I picked this light colored polka dot because I feel like it just calmed it down and made it beautiful. Other than having fun playing with your scraps and your UFOs, why would you want to make quilts this size? They make great NICU quilts if you're doing a donation. That first one would be really beautiful on a side table. This one would make a great dolly quilt, or it could be wrapped around those stuffed animals we showed at the beginning of the video. Why would you want that? Grandchildren. Or Mary Johnson of Heartstrings is collecting quilt tops, and she is willing to quilt them up and donate them to needy children. That is a great way to use them. There's a group of us on Heartstrings that are making them and donating them locally wherever we live, sometimes for police cars so they can give them to children who are in need or who will want them. What do? Well, we buy stuffed animals, and just like this, we wrap them up. So cute. You flip them under the back, and then you flip it under the back again. I end up just plopping it right on its little face, and you can fold it that way both ways. But once it's in there nice and secure, you take your ribbon and you tie a little bow, and then it is like the best package. These also are something you could sell at a vendor booth. It's so adorable. And speaking of which, what mother or grandmother wouldn't want to make this for a child that she loves? That's another reason to make these fun little dolly quilts. Every child would use them for themselves and for their little stuffed animal doll. Stay merry and creative.